Hello, welcome to Project Frame's February community meeting. My name is Carrie Browder, and I'm the director of Project Frame at Prime Coalition. We'll be focusing today on two investor profiles from our community. Our first will be from Daniel Valenzuela from World Fund, and our second will be from Luba Chaval from Closed Loop Partners. But first, I'm going to go through some updates from the Project Frame community, as well as our initial first ever annual survey results to share. We've scheduled an hour and a half, but we're hoping that we'll keep it a bit shorter. For those of you who are new to Project Frame, we are a nonprofit program that is built to organize investors around forward-looking emissions impact methodology and reporting best practices. Ultimately, we hope to improve impact measurement and management standards across climate-driven investments and galvanize a network of leadership around transparency and collaboration. We're growing very quickly. We've almost doubled in the past 6 months. We now have around 600 individual members representing 120 venture capital and private equity firms. And we have around 60 billion in capital raised intended for climate and 200 billion in assets under management. I wanted to provide some general updates on what we've been doing the past couple of months since we met last. Frame and the Crane tool, which was developed in partnership between Prime Coalition and Row Impact, was featured on Tideline's Currents in January. At the end of my updates, I'll share some links in the slides or links in the chat so you can access the information. It was the first of the current series where we actually do a tutorial on different aspects around emissions. And in this case, it was sort of setting the stage for understanding emissions reduction potential. Our Data and Tools Working Group, which launched in September of this past year, which Prime Coalition co-convenes with World Fund, completed its first ever annual survey, which will set the baseline for us tracking against our own impact metrics for years to come. And so I'll be sharing some data on that as a teaser, but the final report will be issued in the next month or so. We are also in the process of trying to develop a platform for our community that brings together all the different players in understanding emission reduction potential or planned impact, or what we call forward-looking impact in one place. Right now, we just have an expressions of interest survey out to the community, which I'll share. And we're looking for tools, experts, and third-party verifiers who work in this space. And then we're figuring out a way to feature that work and the overall landscape coming up this summer. So if any of you are interested, you can definitely submit your interest or share it with anyone in your network that you think could be relevant. Our methodology deep dive paper is scheduled to be released in April. This is the culmination of everything that we've been working on the past few years. Earlier this year, we issued a high-level paper on planned impact. This paper will dive much deeper into forward-looking emissions assessment and the two categories that we see, which we call potential impact and planned, as well as some other aspects that were deemed relevant to our community, such as attribution and additionality. So we're looking forward to doing that in April. And then we also, for those who learn a bit differently and don't feel like diving deep into a very dense methodology paper, we hope to be setting up a studio series where we will have different webinars to go through the different aspects of the paper. We will be launching our newest content working group in May. So the way we operate, for those who are really dedicated to being involved in our programming, we typically work through work plans. So this past content working group has been working together for a little over 2 years, actually, to get to the point of releasing this paper. We now have a new group that we will be starting, which will have around a 1 year to 16-month work plan starting in May. So keep an eye out for that. And last but not least, the paper and as well as our work generally are going to be featured in several events coming up, including Sarah Week, Aspen Ideas Climate, and Bloomberg NEF. If you are at any of those events, please keep in touch. We hope to see you there. Just to give you an update on our annual survey, this is the first survey we have ever done to sort of assess where we are with our community, knowing that we're growing rapidly, and if we're achieving the outputs or the outcomes that we hope to achieve in order to realize our ultimate goal, which is to catalyze as much capital towards the best possible climate solutions and demystify climate investing in general so we can encourage more transparency amongst the community. So I'm just going to go over a subset of what we're seeing. First, we looked at our, not our entire membership, but those who applied to the survey by geography. And unsurprisingly, there's the majority are based in North America or Europe. One of our goals is to increase our diversity globally this next year, particularly focusing in emerging markets. If you can help spread the word about Frame to your colleagues who work in this space in different areas, we welcome the opportunity. We really want to make sure that we are committed to building best practices community-wide beyond just Europe and the US. Also interesting is that the vast majority of our group are investors that provide market rate or above market rate returns. I see that the wording is cut off here a little bit, but we also looked at those who consider themselves investors, but were truly philanthropists who were fine with negative 100% returns, those who work across the spectrum between mission-related investments and program-related investments. Right. The motivations for being involved in emissions impact management were interesting. Commonly, there is a lot of concern for the climate, but also importantly, firm competitiveness and anticipation or the realization of current regulations were also heavy influences. And we also asked if firms were following a methodology like ours or others for forward-looking emissions impact. And the vast majority said yes, which is great because from my understanding 2 years ago, we weren't there yet. And so what we also were encouraged by was that there was a good percentage, 16% here, that said they don't yet, but they intend to. So we think that we're in a really good space to help build some more standardization across the field. We also looked at realized impact or reporting and noticed that the amount is actually smaller. 45 or almost 46% said yes. 16% said no, and almost 40% said no, but they intend to in the future. So that's something to keep in mind moving forward. And then another area that's important to our theory of change, what we hope to see in order to ensure transparency, is more and more investors using third-party verification. And right now, the vast majority do not, and we think that part of that is the market for third-party verification is pretty nascent. And there are only a few actors that we know of in this space. And a lot of that comes through word of mouth within this community, which is why we really think a platform to showcase third-party verifiers would be really useful to our network. Lastly, we want to thank our contributors for our very first survey. This list doesn't include everyone, but includes everyone who gave us permission to recognize them. We really appreciate your input and look forward to growing this community. And investing for our climate with you. And then, so I wanted to open it up to the group very quickly. In order to stay on time, we're gonna hop into our featured stories today. But if you wanted to include in the chat, we would love to hear from you on what you would like to see from us in the future. If there are any topics that are really relevant to and if there are any topics that are really relevant to your investment practice. So we can take those into consideration as we start to build out our work plan, our new work plan, which will be starting in May. So please feel free to share any in the chat. And then of course, you can always message me directly. Thank you. And then I am going to go ahead and introduce Daniel, who is the head of impact at World Fund. And he is also our co-convener on the Data and Tools Working Group. He is going to go into detail on what they call their climate performance potential analysis, which is built in aspects of it is built through the work that Prime Coalition and NYSERDA did together on emissions reduction potential. I can speak that Daniel is definitely one of the pioneers in this group, and I look forward to hearing his insights. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for the introduction. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen to display our impact profile that I think is also available now on the Project Frame website. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm based in Germany for a little context. We're World Fund. I'm heading our impact practice here. The short summary of who we are. We're a venture capital fund based here in Europe, also focusing primarily on European technologies, 350 million that we want to invest across multiple stages from seed to Series B, particularly interest in follow-on rounds, so actually supporting particularly hardware and deep tech companies through their commercialization. We focus on climate tech. I'll talk a bit more about our focus in a second. And we basically look at all the high emitting sectors to deploy capital. And the idea how our fund was born is, 350 million, maybe for everyone tuning in from North America, might not sound like a large fund, but for Europe, it actually is. We have quite a significant gap here with regards to climate tech. And basically our question was, how can we direct more capital into the climate space? And that's why our theory of change, I'll walk you through now, is relatively focused on demonstrating the financial opportunity of climate tech. And with regards to the financial opportunity, we see that actually a lot is happening now in terms of pledges of the majority of global GDP, of regulators, etc. And we actually see that we're in front of the largest transformation that our economy has ever seen, and therefore a massive opportunity. And actually most banks and consultants agree on this. So the idea is now, if we look at past transformations like the internet transformation, it's actually VC-backed companies that have drove majority of the value creation. And then the question is, how can we actually identify the winners of this transformation? And that's where we actually need and want to follow the science. And that's where we see current barriers and challenges in terms of the current market environment, that there's no solid set of instruments in terms of quantifying, analyzing, managing, benchmarking non-financial dimensions, which are crucial to actually maneuver this opportunity. And that's also why we're involved with Project Frame, and think that's extremely important that we as a community work towards more standards and best practices, and with that also more transparency and actually market dynamics towards very climate effective investments. So basically that's how we came up with our solution. As Carrie said, we call it a climate performance potential, which allows us to really focus and identify the companies that will be the main decarbonization drivers of this upcoming transformation. And specifically, we look at companies that have the potential of avoiding 100 megatons or more of yearly CO2 equivalent greenhouse gases by 2040, which is, in our opinion, the point in time where it makes sense to actually find or build the economy, the next generation of our economy as we want it, and as it better serves the planet and the people. So in terms of climate performance potential, what does it actually mean? It's a little bit of a pragmatic approach of organizing the science around a company. We want to basically look at as quantitatively as possible, but also as holistically as possible at the impact value of a company. And that means that we focus on quantifying CO2 equivalent emissions reduction potential as quantified, and then with the ability to actually benchmark it across sectors. But we also want to look at other environmental and social dimensions in a qualitative nature, which should also be positive in terms of their impact, because they're actually quite interrelated. We can talk through examples later on how we believe that they're ultimately related, and you cannot have sustainable emissions reduction impact without with doing harm on these other dimensions. And all of these should fit the theory of change that we're developing as a fund across our portfolio. And this is kind of like the instrument that we are using for identifying valuable decarbonization companies, and the companies that we believe will be the market leaders in the next generation of our economy. And so let's go a little bit deeper in terms of how we organize it along the process. By the way, if anything's unclear, I'm happy to take also questions by interruptions. Otherwise, probably organize them at the end. The investments strategy. Okay, we already talked about CPP, how it's organized along the process. It's basically we throughout the investment process, we start with a progressive approach, in the sense that we build parts of the CPP and build on them up until the end of the process, and then we get to the post-investment and exit phase. Also, I'll have a slide for each of these, so let's maybe go through it step by step. The impact process along the investment process works as follows. So we when a deal comes to us through our deal flow, we actually have 3 instruments to relatively early on decide relatively quickly to sort out the deal or not. And that's maybe as a interesting benchmark is around 60% of the deals that we can filter out and make it a bit more manageable for our investment team. And these 3 instruments are basically, first of all, we have an investment thesis for each of our 5 focus sectors that you saw on the first slide. And on these, we basically try to elaborate and identify kind of within the space of decarbonization drivers as put forward by science. What are the big opportunities for decarbonization, and what are the VC fundable businesses and technologies in this space, and try to organize our technologies in our focus. So that's one instrument. Then the other one is that we actually continuously develop deep dives in technologies and business areas that we're interested in. This is then a few levels more deep. It can be on algae, on carbon markets, carbon data, or similar, and then that will allow us once and for all in that sector to very quickly decide, okay, this business shows the characteristics that we want for this specific technology or not, and then we can put it out relatively quickly here as well. And the third instrument is basically instrument sounds almost a bit too fancy. It's just the kind of like a back of the napkin calculation, which often can get you quite a far away if you actually want to decide, is this in or out? And this is also something where we demand it through our website, for example, from the founders, or maybe through an initial email. Once we get into first calls, obviously we try to create conviction on the initial impact thesis that came from the first step, and also check the mission alignment with the founders. Before we actually get to a term sheet, which is for us then the pre-due diligence, where we try to build our conviction, there is something that we call impact thesis one-pager. So that's basically the CP, like all the relevant sections. We'll walk through them in a second of the CPP, but on one page, but still everything kind of coming together, which needs to be signed off before we can go to a term sheet. And then only once we get to commercial due diligence stage and actually look very closely at the company, we do the full-fledged CPP assessment and quantify the emissions reduction potential by 2030, 2040, assess the risks of achieving that potential. We also have a review process with our scientific advisory board, which contains a few of the leading climate institutions here in Europe, so that we actually validate the assessment that we've made. And we create an ESG, so we have actually two scorecards for creating a snapshot, one on ESG risks and one of ESG opportunities. That is gives us a good understanding of the company and how we will want to work with it, and if there's any risk we should include in our investment proposal. And then when we get to the closing of a deal, we actually define up to 5 impact KPIs per company. The idea is that these are KPIs that have been shown by the CPP assessment to be directly linked or linked into the impact mechanics of the company. So it will be crucial KPIs for our CPP to be achieved, and these will then be measured throughout the holding period, because they will actually influence our carried interest. The next step goes hand in hand with that. It's we weigh these impact KPIs in terms of how much will they actually influence our the weighted impact performance of the company, and we map everything that we've learned in the CPP assessment to basically what's put forward by the EU SFDR and taxonomy regulations, so we can make sure that we're compliant there. And then the last thing is that we create basically our first ESG action plan for the company, and this is something I will also talk a bit more about in a second. Maybe for now, yes?
Before you go to the next slide, can I ask a quick clarifying question?
Yes, please.
Could you speak more to the specifics of the scorecard itself? Like, what are some of the general questions you ask? If there's anything that you'd be willing to follow up or share after this, we could share it with the audience later.
So the scorecard is on ESG side of things. Maybe a word. Probably most have a similar definition here, but impact for us is very strategic, so it needs to be built into the product. It's the core lever of a company, and ESG is operational, where we want to work with the companies to make them exit ready, to make them great companies, because we believe that ESG is a playbook for actually building a good company. And so along the ESG criteria, we have different questions in terms of initiatives that we deem valuable in the early stage of a company, and then depending on the stage, they will fill these out, and we will And I'm happy to share a few of these questions. It's typical questions in terms of do you have a minimal kind of like insured percentage of candidates that identify as female in your hiring processes? Do you have a certain policy on supplier vetting, etc.? And then depending on the company we work with them on implementing these. Yeah.
Thank you. And then on the common or the risks and opportunities, I know you talk about ESG generally, but on the on the E side, on the environmental side, what are some examples of common risks?
So on the so there is two things. There's the risks towards basically our CPP assessment or our impact thesis to come true, and then there's kind of environmental risks like might there be leakage from your battery recycling factory or something like that. But but in terms of the risks to identify to achieving the impact, that's basically, obviously there's always a commercial risk, which the commercial, like the deal team takes care of analyzing and understanding in a really clear way. A risk that we've seen a couple of times in the plant-based protein space. For example, we've invested in one company that does plant-based filet mignons and whole cuts, and their technology has a layering of fiber as part of it, which can be really well used for other types of meat as well. And with alternative or with the meat and fish market, you actually see that there is a very significant difference in terms of unit emissions of different types of meat. And so one of the risks that we actually noted there is that they would be interested in also exploring other spaces. And then it's a question, okay, if they actually pivot into, let's say, the poultry market, or if they pivot into the tuna market, all our impact potential does not work out anymore. And that's a risk basically to achieving that. And it depends on the case where we can say, okay, we want to maybe mitigate that in some way. With one company actually, where we actually even went into a side letter, basically having them agree with us that they won't pursue, or that we can get out if they pursued a pivot into a sector where we don't see the climate performance potential. And these are the type of risks that we're talking about here.
Okay, thank you. Why don't you continue? And I think you have about 6 more minutes. We have more coming into the chat, but why don't you continue, and then we'll hold the rest of the questions to the end.
I think someone made some red marks on my slides.
Kelsey, could you please help us with that? Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So this is basically how the CPP assessment looks like. You can think of these as the headings. So this is, I don't know, like a 30-page document, and you can think of these as the headings of how we build together our CPP. To go a bit faster, maybe then we first have the look at the market as it is today and as it is developing, and try to make an educated guess on how it will continue to develop with its greenhouse gas emissions projections. The second step for us is to understand the impact of the technology that we're looking at. And we do that often through life cycle assessments or similar. We always want to see a certain evidence that this technology is actually additional, and that so it's basically not included in business as usual forecast, and it's not and it's solving a bottleneck or a limitation that the market currently has in decarbonizing. And then we choose a footprint, usually by triangulating different studies, such as peer-reviewed LCAs, but also primary data or LCA-based footprints that we plug together. The third step is basically then putting that together into the climate performance potential, which is basically a potential impact, to use frame terminology, analysis where we typically assume an S-curve technology adoption rate that we parameterize. And we also typically look at the energy contribution, both in the market and in the new technology, so that we can actually reduce that over time, because by 2040, we usually use the International Energy Agency projection for the stated policy scenario, and we use that reduction in the grid intensity for both the incumbent and the new technology, so we can get a more accurate picture of 2040. Qualitatively, we are then assessing environmental and social dimensions. Mentioned earlier that they're interrelated. Maybe 2 questions, we can go a bit more into that if you're interested. We typically try to motivate these by the IRIS Plus set of metrics. And we also have something that we call a regenerative vision, or our vision for a regenerative world, where we always want to make sure that the technology we invest in actually embeds in that vision. And that vision is based on 4 pillars: renewable energy, full circularity, regenerative systems, and climate and social equity. And this rules actually out quite a lot of companies that might not be ruled out explicitly by the next point, which are certain counterfactual scenarios that we're comparing this with. So we are analyzing the company level additionality. Previously, everything was mostly on technology level. And in this step, we actually want to look at the company level additionality. And we also want to look at competing pathways and competing technologies that not just exist today, but could exist in the future, and hence could be investment targets, so that we make sure that we identify really the true decarbonizing solution, and don't see any lock-in risks or lock-in effects that we could face here. And we just talked also about the risks not achieving the climate performance potential and the KPIs that we set, and usually we just get as a corollary the taxonomy compliance. As a brief case, I have prepared here a slide on one of our companies called Planet A Foods. It's a precision fermentation platform where the technology, the first product that they're serving is actually chocolate. So we're not looking at precision fermentation, but or palm oil or other things that they could do, but specifically cocoa butter and cocoa powder that they produce in a local fashion by side streams and locally ingredients. They, I mean, the mass market chocolate industry is quite, has a lot of bad practices, in particular in terms of deforesting rainforest and planting full sun monocultures, full sun exposed monocultures, which has a massive increase or decrease in carbon stock in the soil. And in that case, we actually made quite an aggressive assumption on the premium market chocolate, so everything that's fair trade organic, to get up to 40% market share, and the mass market chocolate to go down to 60%, and Coa or from Planet A Foods or similar alternative cacao technologies to achieve half of that market penetration, half of that market, and parameterize with that our penetration curve. And in terms of comparing this to alternative scenarios, there's notable that the regenerative practices in the regions where cacao is grown need to be the ones that actually are also grown. So actually, we developed with Planet A Foods that they support additional to their product regenerative practices in cacao plantations to kind of like close the circle here. Let's think about what to focus on in terms of maybe in terms of optimizing outcomes in the holding period. It's maybe the last slide I'll talk about. We have carry distributions to actually all employees that are in part of which are tied to impact performance. So it's an incentive for everyone to work on the achievement of the impact goals. We work on yearly ESG action plans with our portfolio companies and recommend them, in our experience, the highest impact initiatives according to their stage. And a result from the impact assessment and the CBB assessment is usually that we can actually understand the impact mechanics of their strategy relatively well, and actually discuss this with founders. And yeah, we have lot of LPs that we try to connect them with, and as well as our ties into the scientific world. But I think we need to leave it with that, so we have some time for questions.
Yes, thank you, Daniel, so much. You have lots of questions in the chat. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them right now before we transition to Luba. But one that came up was around biodiversity metrics and screening. So if biodiversity impacts can often be localized, how do you all manage and screen for that when looking at companies pre-investment?
So the thing, I mean, biodiversity is of extremely high importance to us. So when we developed our impact methodology, one of the reasons that we actually said we quantify one dimension is that we wanted to have an assessment that is of relatively high validity and is based in kind of like a larger body of scientific evidence. And we just found that if you want to go that route, there's only one metric that you can actually really quantify today in a solid way. So that's why we went with emissions and biodiversity. We have actually in our own LP base a lot of experts on biodiversity. So this is one where we assess it in a qualitative nature and also discuss with our scientific advisors. But it's one where we have not yet, and this is. We're interested in always improving that, but where we've not yet decided that we would quantify any of the metrics or indicators you need to say that are put forward for biodiversity. Yeah.
Thank you. And then for your scientific advisory board, would you say that their recommendation determines no or no go on an investment, or is it influential, but ultimately World Fund makes the final decision?
So this is a good. So it is influential in the sense that it's a gate. It is not influential in the way that if we actually fear a significant, deviation from kind of the scientific consensus or understanding, in the moment we would actually involve them earlier on in the process. So when we look at a technology and don't understand or are developing a thesis, we would actually already talk with the scientific advisors that will help us and say, hey, this is the one that in our opinion will actually be the one that will be truly transformative instead of I don't know, just transitional, let's say. So that's where we include them then earlier, and then we typically want to have just a better understanding of the assumptions that we did and iterate on these when we get the validation from that, and also maybe if there's any risks or side effects maybe that we have not foreseen or other technologies that we might have not had on the radar. I hope that answers it.
That's really helpful. I think the word gating says everything. We had a hand up, but I think they lowered it, and I want to give Luba some time, plus there'll be time overall at the end. So if you don't mind, Daniel, there are a couple more questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to try to get to, but we will transition over to Luba from Closed Loop Partners. She's the Senior Director of Impact Strategies, and I personally am a fangirl of Closed Loop and anything that has to do with circular economy. So I'm really excited to hear what Luba has to say, also because Closed Loop is unique in that they have multiple funds amongst multiple asset classes. So I think this will be really unique to what we've heard from some of our other investors so far. So thank you for joining us here today, Luba. Please take it away.
This is my pleasure. Let me start screen sharing. And we'll start from the beginning. All right. Great to be here. Thank you, Gary. And thanks everyone for joining this community discussion. In the next 20 minutes or so, I'll tell you about Closed Loop, the circular economy, my role, and how we integrate forward-looking impact analysis into our IMM strategy. I think that's exactly the part that brought you all here. Closed Loop Partners is the leading investment firm dedicated to the circular economy. We work with investors, institutions, families, and corporates to advance the transition away from linear economy to a more profitable, resilient, circular economic model. We do that through 3 distinct businesses. So look at the left, there is innovation and research arm of the firm. That's called the Center for the Circular Economy. On the right side, you'll see the operating business, which is today the largest privately held recycling company in North America, which we formed in late 2020. And in the middle, that's the capital management arm of the firm, where you see 4 different asset classes, starting from very early stage seed and pre-seed financing, going to growth equity, all the way to buyout, and impact first catalytic funds, where we prioritize impact outcomes versus financial returns. We started in 2014. In 2015, we made our first investment out of the flagship fund, our infrastructure fund. That fund is funded by corporate America. So think of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Unilever, all of them came together and pulled $100 million for us to upgrade recycling infrastructure in the US so that we increase quality and quantity of recycled content in the country. So we started our own bespoke methodology back then when we did our first investment and provided those reports to LPs. LPs were really happy to see what they see back then. In 2017, we went through our first B Corp certification and then recertified in 20, and we're due to another recertification this year. Another interesting milestone here to note is our catalytic funds, they'll have targets, and our plastics fund is designed with a legal innovation. It's not new, but the adoption rate is so low that it's still considered innovation, where there is impact hurdle, not to be confused with impact target, that unlocks the carry. So we need to meet that hurdle in order to unlock carry for the fund. In 2021, our methodology was featured in IMM for SDG course, which was commissioned by UNDP and produced by Duke University. So methodology has changed quite significantly from 2021 and to this year. And not just methodology, the demand from LPs and regulatory environment really helped to shape that. Our foundational pillars for impact is really 3. And I start from the last one because there is no standardization. There are more than 400 different green framework standards metrics out there. That is not helpful for impact investors. So we work with leading organizations to help standardize those frameworks together. We're big fans of verification. We went through 6 external audits today, and we're counting, adding more and more every year. And because there is no standardization, because verification is so new in the space and impact space, we feel that transparency is really what drives forward those impact methodologies. A little more about the circular economy. Currently only about 9% of materials used today on our planet are circular. So circular economy is an evolution for products, from product design, manufacturing, transportation, and end of life. Most of the time that happens on landfills. So circular economy system keeps material in the loop for longer. And it's not only about materials. 70% of emissions globally comes from material use, comes from how we take, make, and waste our materials. So circular economy is inherently addresses climate change. For way of introduction, I'm head of our impact strategies across capital management, across those 4 different asset classes. My role is to make sure that we're using the same tools, the same frameworks and methodologies across those funds. So for that, I work with fund managers. Our fund managers are ultimately responsible for impact outcomes of the portfolio. They're also impact champions. Each fund has an impact champion that works on day-to-day work with me on data collection, on diligence. So I do not work on any of the fund team, right? It's the funds team who does the diligence. I do work closely with LPs though, helping to translate our impact thesis, metrics, and outcomes to the common language. I mentioned the impact thesis, right? So it can be expressed through the theory of change. There's a lot of words here on the slide, but I'll help you situate yourself here. It's a logic model, right? And you start from the end goal, and then you map backwards. So if the end goal for us, that's economic growth that is decoupled from environmental degradation. That's what we see at the vision. And the way we do it, how do we do that? How we drive impact, that comes from our activities. And we're investors, we invest in companies and solutions that drive that circular economy forward. Our portfolio companies will then have a direct measurable outputs that are expressed in two core KPIs. Our two core KPIs are materials kept in circulation and emissions avoided due to those materials kept in circulation. And there are, of course, barriers to get there. Transition to the circular economy requires collaboration on all levels. It requires a lot of innovation and even the policy change. So we recognize we can't get there alone. So together with our broad ecosystem of our partners and stakeholders, we're striving for collective long-standing results of those activities and outputs. We in Closer Partners follow 4 universal steps to measure our impact. For those who took Kathy Clark class on IMM for SDG, that's when it was first featured, and we're adopters of those strategies. I'll walk you through those 4 quickly, and then we'll dive deeper into number 2. So set strategy is really where you develop impact thesis for each vehicle. Each fund that we launch will have its own unique impact thesis, and we build the theory of change for that. You then want to codify your impact intention. So that's where you set targets. And the example for that, our fund that is designed with American Beverage Association will look for incremental 300 million pounds of PET bottles that is put back into circulation. So that's the example of set impact intention, the codified intention. Structure formally is something where you want to concrete your intention into government docs. So you want to have that on paper, you want your investment policy statement to have all the impact steps of your investments woven into the deal cycle and management process. Integrate into deal cycle and optimize portfolio management. That's a classic diligence and portfolio management steps. We'll get back to that. The reinforced outcomes is really a lot about external communication, about our disclosures, about verifications, and at the same time, our internal commitment to constantly evolve and deepen our own thinking on that. So when we set strategy, depending on the asset class, there may be different targets. Most of the time for our catalytic impact first funds, we will set them in stone before we welcome companies to our portfolio. For market rate funds, portfolio level targets would be established once you add a company in. So you add a company, then you set a target for that company that adds to the whole fund target. For deal cycle, through the integrate into deal cycle, there are 2 impact gates, and one is less formal, and that's happening internally with the team. This is really for the team to answer one question. How does this company contribute to circular economy? Does it accelerate the transition to the circular economy? And if the answer is unclear, then again, how Daniel said, it's less work for the deal team. They don't need to look at it. So we only diligence companies in circular economy space. So that's how the first filter for initial companies. Then when the diligence stage happens, before the next impact gate, what we will review, and that happens in collaboration of impact team and the fund team, there are a few components of the IC memo that needs to be in there that we will review. That's impact narrative that comes into 3 different frameworks. Again, it's simplified theory of change that is mapped to SDGs and 5 dimensions of impact. We analyze ESG risks. So ESG DDQ, that is really custom per company type and asset class, because there's so many different ones that we'll look at. And we also create impact pro forma. So that's a quantitative model that feeds into how much of 5 dimensions of impact. So I'm sure all of you here are very well familiar with 5 dimensions of impact. So when we create this impact pro forma, what we do, we essentially create a calculator for a company to tie their unit economics into our core KPIs, right? So how their sales numbers translate into environmental metrics. What's interesting here to note is investor contribution. Again, that's where we as impact investors drive a lot of change for our companies. And the network that we have and we created helps tremendously with, if you think of early stage businesses or company on growth equity that are on purposes of scale, with corporate American companies that are really looking for those solutions and how we can make those connections and help both parties to accelerate those solutions. I think another important thing to note on how much step here is that for those impact models, we use LCA studies. We mostly rely on EPA's WARM model. WARM stands for Waste Authority Reduction Model. It is just created and maintained by EPA, and we're currently on V15. I think they're releasing V16 sometime this year. The way you think about how much this core KPI of materials can mean different things for different companies, right? If you think of core operating recycling business, it may mean very different thing for a software company that enables circularity in a different way or reuse products. So there are definitions that help us put everything into common denominator in common language so that we account for this term materials kept in circulation in a consistent way. I'll give you an example of step number 3, which is optimize portfolio management. This is how we'll look at realized impact versus projected impact. And again, what you'll see here, this is tons of materials kept in circulation. For us, emissions avoided is a direct derivative from materials. So those two always come together. And as a circular economy firm, we start with materials first. Those orange bars represent actuals or realized impact, and blue line on top is what we projected this company to be. We invested in 2016. It's a hardcore operating recycling company with an input of commingled recycles. So everything you put together in recycling bin, this company would sort into different bales and sell to downstream processors. That was one of the companies early in the days where we found ourselves later on to be quite optimistic in projecting impact of our companies. And all those projections are done, importantly to note, in collaboration with portfolio companies. So we don't tell them what we expect you to be. They give us their own projections of how they want to perform, and we align our environmental KPIs with their operating data. And that's how it looks. So what we realized is that first, we don't give them enough time to ramp up. So you'll see how in year 2, our projection went from 10,000 tons a quarter to 11.5. lots of lessons learned in 2021 when we looked at realized versus actual. We thought that we need to give 2 to 3 years for operating businesses to ramp up to be at scale where they need to be or where they projected to be. And also there may be a room for discounting impact, which we haven't implemented before. And the number that we had is just the one we put out there. So I think another interesting part here was for us to see that the capacity of this facility really allowed for projected impact. And you see that through 2 quarters in Q1 and Q3 in 2019. So it wasn't inadequate design capacity for the site, but what turned out, there were some operational challenges that they faced with one material type, just one material type that they couldn't market in a specific quality. That triggered our team, the team that works on recycling specifically, to work closely with them and help fix that material type that didn't find end market. So with that, I do believe it's the last slide, but there are a lot of lessons for us learned and continuously nonstop plans for us to advance. One of the latest and greatest that I'm happy to share with the broader audience, that we started carbon footprinting for our portfolio companies. So we will be done sometime later this quarter with companies that we control. That was our first step to really take full responsibility of not just positive impact, but negative impact that those companies create because they run equipment, because they run trucks. We needed to understand what is that net impact that they put out there for the world. So that's new and exciting, and we'll be sharing more about that through our channels.
Thank you, Luba. That was fascinating, and I'm very excited. I think I speak for everyone. We're really excited to hear more about the reporting that you just mentioned. I think more and more investors are getting into footprinting companies that they support, and looking at how that reconciles with the potential impact that you hope that company or technology can have. You have a slew of questions in the chat, but I am going to focus on a couple and then let you hop in if you want to before we wrap up, since we wanted to make sure we didn't take the full hour and a half this time. First, early in your session, since you are focused on circular economy, we had a couple of questions about if you have any technologies or companies that you support that are specifically focused on ocean plastics. And if not, I also have an idea for another investor, but yes, please speak to ocean plastics first.
We do not do ocean plastics today. We had an arm of the firm that focused on that spun off on the region where really need to focus on that. And they're amazing partners of ours and great impact investors in Singapore, out of Singapore, Circularity Capital, really focusing on ocean plastic. We are primarily looking at North America, so there is much less opportunities for that type of work.
Thank you. And then you mentioned your innovation center. Could you speak a little bit more about that? And I'll tie it to a question that was also in the chat. One of our guests acknowledged that PET can only be recycled so many times. Are there any alternatives that you're looking into that have you excited?
So I think there are 2 questions about, tell us more about center and how do we deal about PET recycling?
Yes, please.
So our Center for the Circular Economy is, think of it as a consultancy arm of the firm that really focuses on pre-competitive collaboration for toughest material challenges. So what they do may or may not have investable solutions today. So Center for the Circular Economy would look at single-use coffee cups, for example. Their first project that they did was Starbucks, McDonald's, Pepsi, all those big brands that use tons and tons of hot coffee cups that has plastic lining inside, right? So there is challenge, you can't really recycle those because they're plastic, they're paper, there's plastic lining inside, and there's a plastic lid. So the way it is, you can't put it in a recycling bin. So that was a consortia of brands that all of them use a lot of plastic cups. And they did a lot of pilots. They did pilots with paper mills. They did pilots with sortation facilities and recycling facilities to understand first how the material flows. Where does it go if you put it in a recycling bin? And then another example would be Beyond the Bag. They work on single-use plastic bags. They just launched the consortium on compostable materials because that's the biggest challenge that you see a growing amount of compostable materials. But the challenge is the infrastructure that needs to be in place in order for those bowls, nice looking things, to be actually composted. So that's the type of challenges that our Center for the Circular Economy focuses on. And the question on PET, you are right, plastic can be only recycled that many times in that form that it is. It's very rare when plastic is reused with 100% recycled content. Most of the time, it's anywhere between 30–40% of recycled content, that's called rPET, will be introduced in virgin material in order to manufacture a bottle. And then there are different technologies to make sure that purity of plastic stays as virgin. And that's technologies that we're looking at. And it all goes back to quality of recycled material. There is a reason why there are limits on PET recycling. It has to be recycled pure and with specific additives in it.
Thank you so much. I have another question for Luba. I wanted to also let people know that they can raise their hand if they want to chime in. So I'm pulling from the chat and then some messages to me directly. I have a question for you, Luba, and then I also have a question for both of you. So something that we're seeing in the circular economy, and I know personally with your investments, is more investment in refill centers. So are you seeing that in order to sort of safeguard our climate, it's almost like we have to take a step back? Is that a one-off, or is that a trend that you see evolving?
It is definitely trending. It's not new though. If you think of the history of recycling, our parents and grandparents used a milkman in order to refill your milk bottles. It's just a new take on the same exact model. It has to be localized, right? So your milkman is right around the corner where it brings it to your doorstep, and it has to be optimized for the product that you're using. So I think it's a trendy take on the same old new way of doing and using materials.
Thank you. And then to both of you, you both touched on this in your presentations, but if you could dive a little bit more on how you manage a company or an investment that continues to be bankable or lucrative, but say that the impact over time is not what you anticipated. How, I know you spoke about it in each of your presentations a little bit, but like, what are some approaches you would take to steer that company to make sure they yield the impact as much as the financial return? Daniel, why, since I've made Luba speak a lot, why don't I let you go first, and then I'll let Luba go?
It's a good question. I mean, we always try to only invest in companies where the value proposition of the product is intrinsically linked to impact. However, there's a few ways how it can actually play out, like a company pivot or similar, that the company might go into a direction where it achieves less impact than you had planned. We have a few mechanisms in place where we can actually either try to get out. I was mentioning that for some of our companies. So for one of our companies, we've actually had a side letter. With another one of our companies, we've actually, when we've realized this, we actually had a convertible that we just didn't didn't convert and were paid out. So this is definitely a measure that we have used and also intend to use if it doesn't have a significantly bad impact on the company, obviously. And then there's the part where we really, first of all, trying to work with mission aligned founders, which always helps over the holding period to actually work with them. And one way that we work with them is just we discuss with them the identified impact mechanics of the product, the impact mechanics of the adoption of the product and of the market, and continuously have them report on these environmental metrics tied to impact or to their business operations, so we can actually also steer against them or factor them into the strategy in the first place. I hope that's not unsatisfying because I think I said it before, but but that's how I would answer it in a nutshell. Yeah. Not sure if you have what you have to add.
Yeah. I think in general, I would say that I think it shows that we do a good job on selecting companies, right? But as we grow, we do have more than 70 portfolio companies, and it's we need to understand that there may be pivot in business model. So what we created is an impact steering committee, and we started just last year because there were some changes in one of our companies, the first company ever from our 70 plus and close to 10 years operation of Closed Partners, that changed their business in a way that we were not entirely comfortable with, supporting some oil exploration companies. So the way we handle that, we raised the question to the steering committee. We raised the flag, we brought it to steering committee, and made a decision based on that discussion. But overall, I should say that we've been really lucky and privileged working with companies for whom impact is at core of their business model. But I think right governance processes are good to have in place.
Thank you so much. And then I see one in the chat. For a new fund starting out, is there support to help develop an impact investment thesis or theory of change? I'll let this person know if they're focused on climate or emissions, we can definitely find you some resources through Frame, but it'd be great to hear from both of you on maybe just sort of what your process was starting out as to help guide our viewer here in the right direction.
Our process was, and I would maybe recommend something along these lines, but our process was basically to talk to a very diverse group of people very intensively to identify what you can learn from their approaches. And so I can tell you about the history of World Fund. I think we talked to roughly 90 experts from finance, from science, from different research institutions and from different geographies to actually come up with what we think is a good trade-off of like scientific rigorousness and actually very actionable for investors that are not just scientists. And if you have a thesis that is a bit more narrow, I think that's even better, if even higher potential of actually creating like a really good impact thesis by really trying to understand the problems that this market has in decarbonizing, or if you have a different type of impact that you care about, to basically achieve that change within the sector. So I would then also talk to a lot of industry experts and try to understand from a customer perspective. I guess the challenge is to develop a theory of change starting from that. Maybe that is my 2 cents. Luba, over to you.
I mean, we did a really extensive program that I don't think I will recommend, but we did a series of workshops with each individual fund in order to come up with a theory of change for each fund. I think it's also tells the uniqueness of Closed Partners because we have so many funds and asset classes that needed to work in silo, but at the same time be able to strive for the same outcomes. But what I wanted to do is really to give a shout out to our impact auditors. When we did our first impact audit, and that's Blue Mark, they not only gave us the score, they told us and they gave us tons of resources that were helpful in order to improve on what we have today. And that's another value of impact audits. It's not just a diagnosis of where you are, it's also an advice of how to do things better, because they see so many and they just being a great partners.
Thank you. We have another one, and then I'll let you guys provide some closing remarks, and then I have some myself. I will say Blue Mark will definitely be featured in whatever platform that we end up pulling together on the Data and Tools Working Group. In the same vein of the last question, do you have any recommendations to ventures that are approaching VCs for investment? Should they consider a profit-led pitch deck or an impact-led pitch deck? Or do you have any other programmatic tips?
Luba, do you want, or should I?
You can go ahead.
Okay. So I think the first question would be, what kind of investors do you want to work with? Based on that, if you have a good understanding, how can they maybe contribute to the business? What are the kind of like their expectations on the business? And on that, you basically can like, depending on who you want to work with and how, you can make a list of who you want to talk to. And then I can imagine that it might be actually impact investors or climate investors. Once you talk to these, they actually know, they have built their thesis on the link between impact and financial returns or profit returns. And for them, you want to have impact metrics that are well informed and well grounded in scientific data. So that's definitely kind of like the one component that you want to have. And then you don't need to necessarily link that into how that will become more profitable over time, but you definitely need to show that your unit metrics are or that the business side of your venture is actually working well. And only then, if you can actually start a company and scale a company, you will achieve that impact that you've argued for. So it is a little bit of a combination, but the bridge from impact to actually financial returns will be able to be done by the impact investors.
Was there anything you wanted to add there, Luba?
I see the last question in the chat and wanted to maybe answer there.
Okay.
So I see that, so should I read the question to everyone?
Sure.
It disappeared. Sorry, can you?
Okay. The one about pitch decks?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your advice for a startup approaching VCs? Profit-led pitch deck or impact-led pitch deck? Any other programmatic tips?
Sure. Yeah. So I think what we see helpful is to have one integrative approach, right? We want to see impact being part of the mission and part of the why you run the business. And that's what proven to be successful and impactful as you scale your business. So I don't think it has to be separated, but we want to see that VCs, startups keep the system level, really how your business fits into the broader theme. If you're talking to a circular economy investor, fit it into the circular economy, not just sustainability as broad, but to the theme that your LPs or GPs are care about, and keep big picture in mind, but also make sure that you can support that with numbers. We invest in very early stage companies, so many times there isn't anything to support with evidence, but then we build a hypothesis, right? So how do you think, what do you think will be if you reach X? So there's also always helpful to have some numbers behind in order to support that big system level thinking.
Thank you so much. And I believe we covered a good portion here. The idea was to give people some found time, which is my favorite thing in the world. I want to thank Daniel and Luba so much for taking the time today. As a reminder to everyone, their full investor profiles are on our website. So if you want to dive deeper, this was just an overview of a much more in-depth analysis. So thank you to you both. Also, thank you to the Prime team, in particular, Kelsey Litwin, for helping us pull this together. And if anyone is interested in being featured for an investor profile, please contact me directly. We host these meetings. We're trying to host them typically every other month. Thank you all for your contributions and dedicating your time today. And we look forward to learning more with you in the future. Have a nice day. Thanks, guys.